are checking in with the doctor for your daily fantasy football update.
Oh, yeah.
The best thoughts, opinions, advice, and random fantasy talk in the biz.
You heard the man.
So here he is, your host of Doc's Office, Dr. Fantasy himself, Jordan Jaika. Jordan Jaika.
All right, what's going on, everybody? You are checking in with the Dr. Jordan Jaika here, aka Dr. Fantasy. Very happy to have our first guest on today in Doc's office. I am here with Cejaay from the NFL Fantasy Football Report. We're going to be going over some fantasy impact players from round one of the NFL draft. Happy draft season, everybody. Cejaay, glad to have you. What's going on? Just kind of initial thoughts. What'd you think of night one of the draft?
Well, if yeah, that's a great intro, by the way. I'm jealous of your intro.
I'm prepared. What can I say? We worked hard on that.
Yeah, well, you did a good job. I don't know I guess my opinion, if I read Twitter this morning, I guess it was horrible last night. But if I thought it before I read Twitter, I was thinking like, well, that was pretty good last night. I thought that most of the teams got pretty good players for what they needed. And the one that really impressed me was Mac Jones going to New England. I think that's just perfect. And I think he's the perfect mold for that type of team. And I just love the fact that San Francisco went out and took Lance as well. Mm-hmm. I think those two guys are going to be good.
Yeah, and one of the things we were talking about before we started recording was this was your first NFL draft on Twitter, so it's a whole new experience. You got to see the draft in a whole new light that you never knew that you needed to see it in. So we welcome you to back to the fantasy community here, and welcome to Fantasy Twitter.
Oh, gee, thanks. It's like so much negativity. I couldn't believe.
On behalf of the millions, let me be the first to welcome you on camera to Fantasy Twitter.
Oh, it's a beautiful thing. Thanks very much.
Let's kind of roll into, I'm going to start kind of break it down position by position here, talk a little bit about the landing spots. And obviously, as we go out throughout the offseason, I'm going to do some more individual episodes on individual players. But I just want to kind of recap each pick, kind of talk about where we see them finishing year one and beyond. So I'm going to start it off with a lot of people's favorite player from this draft, except Trevor Lawrence, Kyle Pitts going to Atlanta. Interesting landing spot here for him. I think a lot of people were predicting this is where he was going to go pre-draft. For me, I think it kind of signals the end of Julio at some point here. I think that's maybe not in the direct future, but over the next few years, they do have quite a few weapons now there in Atlanta with Julio, Pitts. They brought in Hurst, Calvin Ridley really emerging last season. Now, one of the things that I think is interesting is people are looking at it from the lens of the Falcons offense last season. And one thing, Cejaay, as you listen to me more and as I do more shows, I'm very big into offensive schemes and analyzing how that directly leads to fantasy production. So one of the things that I think people are going to get trapped into here with Kyle Pitts, and I've seen some people already say Kyle Pitts is going to be a top 5 tight end year one, which I think is absolutely bizarre. And if you look at it historically, I went back, I did an article probably about 6 months ago, and I dug through, I believe it was 25 years of fantasy data. And there's only 2 or 3 tight ends, and I know one of them was Gronk, that finished in the top 10 their rookie season. So, I mean, historically speaking, tight end is a tough position to adjust to in the NFL. Now, he's going to be a little different. He's going to line up in the slot. But one of the things with Arthur Smith coming in is this is going to be a different scheme that we're not used to in Atlanta. When he was in Tennessee last year, he ran a lot of gap zone run schemes. We saw that with Derrick Henry, which really set up the play action for Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee, and I expect them to bring a similar philosophy, Arthur Smith that is, to Atlanta. So I think Kyle Pitts' volume isn't going to be as fantastic as everybody's anticipating it being, but for the value there, Kyle Pitts, you could argue, is the most talented player in this draft. So to go out, they're in a position where they have a decent team overall. I mean, their defense is not the greatest, but there's really not any defensive players that warranted the 4th selection this year. So I think they went out, got the best player, but I'm interested to see how Arthur Smith implements him into this offense this year.
I think one of the biggest issues for tight ends is blocking.
Mm-hmm.
In the National Football League, you can't miss a block, right? And coaches, I've talked to a few of them over the years, and when a player misses a key block, he goes to the bench and he gets told. And the rookies tend to miss a lot of blocks, whether it's fear or they just forget or they just they haven't recognized something that happens because they're not playing against boys anymore. They're
Yeah.
playing against men, and these guys have been in the league for 5 and 6 years, and they look at rookies and they try to intimidate them a little bit. And it's not that he's going to be intimidated, but I think when you see someone like Pitts with the big expectation and how good he is as a receiver, when you flip him around and ask him to block for somebody, that imaginary running back that they have, but when you ask him to block, or he misses the block, and the quarterback gets nailed, right? Those are the things that coaches don't like. They don't make coaches smile. So I think when you got a guy who's being now going to be forced into maybe doing something that he's not always been asked to do, he's not the highlight, and you might have trouble adjusting to that. But long term, you got a good one there. But I think I agree that the first year, I don't see him being a dominant tight end in the National Football League at all.
Now, let me ask you something. You have been around the sports industry longer than my parents have been alive, probably. So, not to put it, I hate to put a number on that, but it's so one of the things that I've always been kind of curious about, especially with tight ends. Do you think the importance of tight ends being able to block in today's NFL has become less important over the years? Now we see guys like Travis Kelce, even Mike Gesicki to a certain level, Noah Fant coming into the league. It seems like a lot of these younger guys are more of this hybrid wide receiver tight end position, similar to what Kyle Pitts is coming in as. So, Arthur Smith did run a lot of two tight end sets with Jonnu, and Anthony Firkser, I believe, was their second tight end last year, more of a run blocking force there, which was important in this offense. So do you think something like that has become less important, or is that one of those perceptions that as fans we have?
Well, I bet you if you look at a team's depth chart, and it has nothing to do with fantasy, that the best blocking tight ends are there when they do their depth. That's tight end 1, that's tight end 2. My pass catcher is tight end 3, right? So they look at the tight end as an extra guy. That was the position that I played, right? And we were receivers, but we had the block. We could not get on the field unless we could block. If we could block, then we could play. And once we got play, then when there was like desperate situations or you needed 3 yards or something, that's what a tight end did. Now it's a little different. And I think that, if you can catch as a tight end, that's great. But I still go back to that blocking thing. If you cannot hold the end and you can't make the block when it's needed, that you're going to be sitting on the pine a little bit. And I mean, a coach I talked to in Canada once, Don Matthews, he's in the Canadian Football Hall of Fame now. He had just traded a rookie halfway through the season, and the rookie was doing really well. And I asked him why he traded him. He says, because in the end, rookies get coaches fired. And, they make mistakes, and the next coach is the one that benefits from it. Right? So I think that tight end is one of those positions where you have to be good at multiple levels and multiple tasks. And that's why it's so difficult to go from college to the NFL.
Yep. Yeah, and I would agree with that too. I remember going to your depth chart point as well. Last year, Brian Flores did that in Miami. Mike Gesicki was listed as the second tight end on the depth chart. Can't even remember who the first guy was. He ended up being their blocking tight end, quote unquote. But yeah, it's funny that people have that overreaction saying, oh, is Mike Gesicki going to get the targets? And, he has his role, and they have I can't even remember the guy's name. That tells you how important blocking is to the fantasy community as a whole. We don't even remember that tight end's name.
I felt bad because I couldn't remember his name either.
Yeah, I'm trying to think it. I can't come up with it off the top of my head. I know I talked about it on an episode at the time, but I digress. So let's move into some wide receivers here. We'll go to Jamar Chase going and reuniting with his former college teammate with the Bengals and Joe Burrow. overall, a lot of people, this is one of the most heavily criticized picks that I've personally seen on Twitter, just because we saw Joe Burrow have a lack of protection. They obviously need to address that offensive line. We've seen poor offensive lines ruin young quarterbacks' careers in the past. Everybody always wants to point to David Carr. Apparently, that's the only example throughout the course of all of the NFL's history. That's the only example that I ever hear. But overall, I think that there was some concerns with Penei Sewell that I started to read in scouting reports. It's interesting sometimes as you get closer to the draft, all of a sudden new information starts coming out and new things start leaking out. I think Penei Sewell is going to be a fantastic tackle in this league. But one of the things, the Bengals do have several high-end picks in this draft. I mean, I would be shocked if they didn't address that offensive line in rounds 2, 3, and 4 early on day 2 here. So I'm not ready to completely jump on the Bengals criticizing their draft, especially since we haven't seen the entire product. That's like eating half of your meal and saying the entire meal was terrible. I'm personally just I'll let it play itself out. We'll see how it goes. Jamar Chase was my number 1 wide receiver coming in this year. He's just got the combination of size. He's only 6 foot, but he's not Jalen Waddle sized either. He's got good height. He's got great athleticism. He gets great separation from corners, and he played against some elite corners at LSU. They showed footage several times of him beating up fellow first-round pick Patrick Surtain last night. So he's done it against high-level competition. Having that chemistry is going to be huge in year 1 for him. Now, Zach Taylor's the head coach there, calling the plays in Cincinnati. He runs a very similar style to what Sean McVay's done in LA. And now Matt LaFleur with the Packers. That's kind of the breed that he comes from. So the volume's going to be there for Jamar Chase. I think it's interesting overall to see what the target distribution is going to be throughout the course of the year. T. Higgins looked fantastic as a rookie in year 1. I was really impressed with him. Tyler Boyd's kind of solidified himself as one of the better slot men in the league, but I like the landing spot for him. I think chemistry is one of the most underrated pieces of a wide receiver's success. We saw Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen work really hard on that piece last year. So I think it's a great landing spot for him. A lot of people had Jamar Chase going top 3 in dynasty drafts, year 1, rookie dynasty drafts, that is. And I still think he solidified himself as a top 3 pick there. And I think long term, I think it's similar to CeeDee Lamb going to Dallas last year. A lot of people were worried about that target distribution, but when you have talent, the ball tends to find you at the end of the day.
And when your quarterback's throwing 50, 60 passes,
yeah.
I'm sure.
Joe Burrow averaged 41 attempts last year.
Yeah, I love that comment. I think it was Tony Romo said that he had thrown like 60 balls or something. It was getting close to 500 yards passing one game early in the season. And they said, 500 yards. And Romo said something to the effect that, well, if you're throwing 60 passes, you better have 500 yards.
You're doing something wrong if you don't.
Yeah. Well, that's a trio that you have to watch now. I mean, if you cover Boyd, then Higgins and Chase are open. If you concentrate on Chase, you're probably going to see a lot of zone D. And if you've got a quarterback who can pick apart a zone, you're not going to be able to stop him, because one-on-one, you're not going to be able to stop all 3 guys. No. And in a zone, if you've got a quarterback that knows what's going on, right, and can find that guy, heck, I mean, the longer he's got in the pocket, and here's the thing, the longer he's got in the pocket to find that guy, the better it is. So now you've got the situation where you have to improve the offensive line, because last year on the times I saw Burrow, he was running for his life, and it was just a matter of time before something happened. I mean, he threw 60 passes, but they were all like panic passes. It was horrible, horrible situation. But once you fix up that offensive line, then everything will be good. Mixon will be better, and the entire lineup is going to it'll meld together if you've got that offensive line. So I love offensive linemen because I used to play on the offensive line. I know that's what
I was too. I'm a former high school guard. That was my position growing up.
Well, as a tight end, we were linemen. Tight end was not a receiver. Tight end was a
That's going to be news to a lot of people that listen to this. You don't use those interchangeably. You should know better.
No, you don't. There was a guy in Calgary. His name was Herm Harrison, and he had about size 12 hands, like 12-inch hands or something. So his nickname was Ham Hands. right? Herm Ham Hands Harrison. The guy was phenomenal. He was like the first tight end really that was a pass catcher as well as a blocking tight end. And that was back in the 60s. That
Just
was a
like it
long
was
time.
yesterday.
That was a long time ago. I've seen every Super Bowl, so
Wow, okay.
yeah.
That's
Well,
that's a fun fact of the day.
the first two were not Super Bowls, right? They named the Super Bowl for Super Bowl III, and they retroactively added the first two to that. So that was just before that was just the NFL AFL championship game.
See, I knew that. I didn't know that they retroactively went and changed it, though. I still refer to those first two as the NFL championship. So,
Yeah.
see,
Well, the
you learn.
Jets won Super Bowl III, right?
Super. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Okay. Let's move to the next receiver here. We have Devonta Smith, the Heisman winner from last year, going to the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles, I know Eagles fans are happy about this pick. Highly criticized for not taking a wide receiver in the first round of the draft the last few years. Devonta Smith is the third wide receiver off the board. There's not much you can. Now, this is one of those picks where I think I've seen very little criticism. Now, I know people are. I love the Slim Reaper name for Devonta Smith. I think it's clever, makes me chuckle. The guy is he's a very, we've seen him. He's a small guy, but he's probably the best route runner in this draft. He has all the intangibles that you need to be successful in the league, just maybe not the physical traits that we think of a prototypical wide receiver. The best comparison I've seen is Marvin Harrison, who is about the same size coming into the league. So I think that's a great upper comparison if he can live up to those expectations. But the Eagles do have potentially the speediest wide receiver core with Jalen Reagor coming into year two, Devonta Smith. I love that they're building around Jalen Hurts. I was a big Jalen Hurts guy last season. I love his leadership. I love just the way that he approached the college game. When he got benched, then he started again. And I think the leadership that he showed is something you can't teach a guy. So I love him. I love building around him. Obviously, for fantasy leagues, he's a guy that's going to provide a lot of value on the ground as well. But he gets another weapon. They're committing to Jalen Hurts. I don't have much to say about this pick. I think it makes sense. It's one of their biggest need, probably arguably their biggest need. I think year one, you could see him have the most fantasy points out of any of the rookie wide receivers just based on the opportunity that he's going to have. We'll have to see where some of these day two guys and day three guys land. But I think he has the potential year one to have the most success.
Well, as a Cowboy fan, my smart aleck response to that immediately when they took him was, "Oh, good, another wide receiver they can ruin," right? I think what happened in Philadelphia last year was you have some veterans that have gone to Super Bowls and so forth, and they leave the room because they're injured and they don't hang around the team much. So you get a new guy coming in playing his own music and sort of has a vibe in that dressing room, and then when they come back, the music stops and these two guys kind of take over the room again. So I think there was a little bit of that. I don't think you're not going to have that issue this year. You're going to have a bunch of young guys who are going to find their way together as a group, right? And they're going to have that feeling like, hey, it's us against the world, and we have something to prove. And that's a good situation. And Hurts, I'll trade him to you, by the way, in that league.
I'll take him. I know you stole him from me.
Well, I knew someone would want him. But anyway, I don't. I can't have him. He's a Cowboy fan, right?
Very bold of me, by the way, to invite somebody, my first guest, somebody that beat me in a fantasy championship. So it's very, very humbling for me.
Just very much, just by a little, and it was it was worrisome for a couple of days there. So it was the Monday night fiasco that killed you, right?
Yeah. Monday night killed me.
Devonta Smith, I think, is the best receiver in the draft. I think the size was what killed him as far as pick and where he went in the draft. I think Philadelphia is the perfect spot because it's a team that can use a guy. They're all young guys. They all fit together. They're all going to have fun. And I think you're going to see that on the field. I think you're going to finish 2 games behind Dallas. Right?
I'm taking that with a grain of salt.
Are you? Okay. Well, I think fantasy-wise, I think that it's going to be good. I think he's going to score a lot of points. I think you're right. I think he's going to get more points than anyone else. But that's because of the position he's in. He's going to be the best guy out there. Fulgham still, I think, is a good receiver, and I think he's worth having on the end of your bench just in case. Don't want to let that guy go, and then all of a sudden find out that he's actually, the roommate of the quarterback or something along those lines. You don't want to do that. So, but I think Smith and Reagor, those guys can finally come into their own. And I think that's a good spot for him. I was glad to see Dallas trade that pick and get something for letting them have him, because then Dallas then took the defensive player that they sorely needed.
Dallas, they got to pick up a few picks in the process.
They should have just gone D for the next few days. They don't need any offensive players, but Jerry wants a guy on the star every year. So I don't know. We'll see what happens.
I'm not a Cowboys fan, but my first thought was, who on the Cowboys is covering Devonta Smith? Not that they're going to ruin him.
Well, we got to find somebody.
Yeah. But yeah, Cowboys made a nice pick there. They definitely, historically, they had a historically horrendous start defensively last season, so they had to go out and address that. So let's go over to Devonta Smith's teammate now, heading out to Miami with Jalen Waddle. It was really interesting to me as we got closer to the draft. Jalen Waddle was one of those guys' stocks that I consistently saw rise, especially on Twitter. A lot of people thought Jamar Chase, Devonta Smith, 1A, 1B, but as we got closer to the draft, Jalen Waddle I saw at the top of a lot of people's wide receiver boards heading into the draft. I like Jalen Waddle. Everybody will throw the Tyreek Hill comparison out there. It's kind of imprudent to me. It seems to me that every speed receiver that comes into the NFL now, we're throwing the Tyreek Hill comparison on. And I think that's just now I like Jalen Waddle. I think he has the best chance out of everyone we've seen. I saw it with Jalen Reagor a few times last year. Just over the last few years, it seems like the fastest receiver is going to be Tyreek Hill. That's what I hear on fantasy Twitter every single year. Now, I do think out of all those guys that have been drafted the last few years, Jalen Waddle is the most polished. He's a better route runner than some of those guys, a little more of a complete wide receiver. I really respected the toughness that he showed when he came back for the championship game. I think that he risked quite a bit there, but just going out there when really he didn't have to. He was going to be a top 10 pick no matter what. Showed a lot about his character as a player, and I think that's something that people aren't going to pay much attention to during rookie drafts, but I like to see that in a young player. I think the biggest question will be what his volume is short term. Obviously, when they're taking a guy 6th overall, long term, this is their number one guy. I think he'll go a lot higher, obviously, and be much more coveted in dynasty leagues than redraft leagues. They signed Will Fuller to a 1-year deal. They still have Devontae Parker, Mike Gesicki still hanging around there. So there's going to be a lot of targets to go around. And I think based on what we saw from Tua last year, they can't put too much of this offense on Tua, because that just seems like a recipe for a lack of offensive production for the Dolphins. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how they structure this offense. Tua really has no excuses not to go out there and perform. I was really concerned with what I saw from Tua last year, but I still think he has great accuracy to be successful in this league. But he was very jittery in the pocket, and the Dolphins' offensive line, granted, isn't the best, but I'm a little concerned about Tua. We'll see how it shakes out this year. I want to see how they structure this offense. More specifically, they named co-offensive coordinators this offseason. Haven't really announced who's calling the plays yet, so I think that'll change my opinion a little bit depending on what kind of scheme they implement. But I think year one, Jalen Waddle is going to disappoint people. I think as we go through maybe the first half of the season, you're not going to see him implement into the offense as much as you'd like to see. Maybe more of a returner, some gadget plays for him, getting him acclimated to the NFL game. But maybe by the second half of the season, we'll see him emerge, especially for that inevitable Will Fuller injury that comes during the second half of the season as well. So what do you think of Jalen Waddle going to Miami here, CJ?
Hey, Will Fuller didn't get hurt last year.
He didn't. He got suspended.
he had a new trainer, and they worked on his core.
That's all it took.
That's what you call it, right? Instead. It's too bad there isn't some kind of miracle drug that can cure that core.
I'm sure they're working on it. They're working on it as we speak.
I'm sure he tried it. Waddle, he was Tua and him played together in college, and I think when you get guys that have that camaraderie and they come back and they get to play together. Imagine the first practice, the first game. Hey man, remember that play? There's all those little things that start to happen. So I think that Tua will be excited that he's there. And I think that'll garner some targets early. But I think in wide receivers take longer I always call it bake them in the oven. They have to sit in there for a year or two or three sometimes before they make their mark. So a lot of times you don't see these wide receivers do much in their first year. And that's because there's guys ahead of them who know the play, know what to do, know the expectation of the quarterback. But in this case, you've got a quarterback where he maybe has the advantage of knowing what Tua's about to do and what Tua's tendency is because he played with him so much before. So I think he gets a little bit of a nudge up in that respect. But with all those guys ahead of him in the lineup, I mean, even Bowden last year, he had 27 catches in his last 5 games. So, you start to factor in all those mouths to feed. And that's one situation where there are a lot of mouths to feed, which is bad for fantasy, but great for the team. Right. So you're probably going to see the guy get 500, 600, 700 yards, which in terms of fantasy is like, people will be trading them cheap at the end of the year. But then Parker will leave, and all of a sudden that'll be 900 yards. And, then all of a sudden over time, he'll become that guy, and that's why you take a guy number 6, because you think that 3, 4, 5 years from now, he's going to be your number 1 guy. With linemen, you want something sooner, but with wide receivers, you have a little bit more patience. Running backs, you need that guy to produce like year 1, year 2, or he's going to be a RB3 for the rest of his career. So you need to get that wide receiver involved, but at the same time, everyone's expecting these guys to pull 1,000, 1,500 yards, and that's just not realistic. In an average year, there are two wide receivers that go into the NFL as rookies that actually make a difference and become wide receiver 1s. Last year, it was Lamb and Jefferson. And, this year, some of those guys that were outside that top 25 group will probably work their way in. But every year, you're only going to see a few guys. And the 3 that got taken off the board early there, like I call early, I don't see any downside long-term to any of them. I think that the guy in Philadelphia, Smith, is going to be the one who's going to have the best year. But I think that eventually those 3 will be dominant receivers in the NFL.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to receivers and rookies as a whole, I think there's a little bit of recency bias that comes into play. People look at Justin Jefferson and they say, hey, why can't Devonta Smith? Why can't Waddle? Why can't they do that? Different situation, different player. That's why I analyze each player individually and look at them in their individual situation and their individual talent, because I feel like people are always chasing, and I kind of mentioned it with Tyreek Hill too, we're always chasing the next X player when, just let them be Devonta Smith, let them be Jamar Chase, let them be Jalen Waddle. So that's the way that I've always approached it.
Yeah, and I think you're right with that. I mean, your teams are always good. I mean, I have never seen.
I've never had a bad team in my entire 18 years of playing fantasy. Nope. And there's a few people rolling their eyes out there as they listen to that.
I can't say the same. I've been doing this for 39 years, but remember I told you my first quarterback was Lynn Dickey. There'll be a bunch of people like, Lynn who?
My first fantasy quarterback, just to put it in perspective, was Matt Hasselbeck. So
there's a little quarterback. Yeah.
Yep. I was 8 years old. That's the first time I ever played fantasy football, and I drafted players that only played for bird teams. I was really into animals, so I drafted Matt Hasselbeck. That was Jamal Lewis's 2,000-yard season, and I won a championship, by the way. So,
I'll tell you, Lynn Dickey, right? He held the Packers record for yardage. I think it was 4,400 yards in '83, right? And I just took him because of his name back then. That was the only reason. But he had 4,400 yards and threw something like 32 touchdown passes, which at the time was amazing. And those are Packer records, right? And it took till 2011 when Aaron Rodgers to break that record. So Lynn Dickey was not a slouch. But that was his only good year. But I had him, so I was pretty excited.
4,400 yards now. I mean, we don't even get out of bed for that. That's not impressed. That's just the average quarterback now. 2 more receivers went in round 1 here, so we'll go to Rashod Bateman going to the Baltimore Ravens. Once a good situation for him to get targets early on. They brought in Sammy Watkins on a short-term deal, so maybe not well, I'll start with this. We all know that the Ravens heavily rely on that run game, so there's not naturally going to be a ton of targets for Rashod Bateman. But long term, I think that Hollywood has shown he's not going to be the number one wide receiver there. He just hasn't shown. And that there's a perfect example of the next Tyreek Hill not being the next Tyreek Hill is Hollywood Brown over in Baltimore. And I really liked Hollywood coming out. He's definitely he's been underwhelming, but I definitely think at this point we can say he's not going to be a number one wide receiver. Can he be a great speed option next to a strong number one? I think so, but they bring in Rashod Bateman long term to be that guy. He's a guy that year one, he's not going to have a ton of volume, especially with Sammy Watkins taking a lot of those targets from the X spot there. So he's a guy, he'll probably see 60 targets once Sammy Watkins moves on to his next short-term destination naturally, as he has so far in his career. That'll open it up for Bateman, but it's one of those spots that's not overly sexy for fantasy purposes just because of the offensive scheme. But I think long-term, him and Lamar have the chance to develop together, and he can really be an alpha number one wide receiver for them in years 2, 3, and beyond.
I disagree with Hollywood. I think he's going to come into his own this year. He kind of came into his own at about the midway point of last year. Mm-hmm. And fast quarterbacks have a tendency, based on my experience, that to slow down. You know, like Jackson, everyone, you know, it was like he caught the league by surprise. Mm-hmm. And the second year, and now the third, you know. So I think you're going to see less and less of him as he starts to get older and he gets hit a little bit more, and that little nagging injury and this one here, just be a little bit more careful. So now you start surrounding him with good guys. And now all of a sudden it's not just Hollywood anymore. Now it's Hollywood and Bateman. And so last year they brought in Des Bryant. Now, of course, I love him. And yes, he caught the ball. But now, you know, the guy's 30 years old and he can still play. But if you're starting to bring in guys like that, it means that you have an issue. And, you know, you have like, I think Snead is gone now, right? And so you've got openings there and you need players. I wouldn't be surprised if they grab another wide receiver, not in the second round maybe, but maybe in the third or fourth if they have a pick. I'm not really familiar with the picks that they have coming up, but I don't see, there's not a lot of need in Baltimore. They need to spread that field out a little bit. And my thought is spreading that field out helps Hollywood. And, you know, as someone pointed out to me last year, he said, if you do have Hollywood Brown on your team and it's a Monday night game, you play him because it's Hollywood on Monday night, right? So the guy that goes by the name of Hollywood, you got to know that in those special games, he's going to be special. And like Sammy Watkins, he's going to come out great like he always does, first 2 or 3 games, and he's going to get all these points, then trade him because he's not going to play the rest of the season or he's not going to be good the rest of the season. That's his thing. He plays for 3 or 4 games and he gets all kinds of fantasy points. And then after that, it goes away. So, and that's just the way he is. But so there's spots there. And then you have 2 guys out there that can catch the ball and 2 guys the quarterback likes, then it spreads the defense out just a little bit more and he doesn't have to run as much. And if he's not running as much and he's throwing more, that's better for fantasy in a lot of ways. It's better for the receivers too.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's one thing that you'll see a lot of people point out with Lamar is if he wants to have a long-term sustainable career, it's going to be hard if he has 170 carries a year. That's a lot of extra hits that he's taking on a year basis. So the game's going to have to slow down. Otherwise, he's not going to have a 15-year career that I'm sure the Ravens want him to have.
Well, even Russell Wilson slowed down a little. You know, now he uses his receivers more. You know, the joke used to be, who's the leading rusher or who's the number one RB in Seattle? Well, it's Russell Wilson. But he's older now and he doesn't want to do that anymore. Now he wants to find guys to do the running for him. So this is what the progression is, right? So you're going to see him start to look for, and they're smart. They built the line, they got running backs, and now all they got to do is find wide receivers. And there's way more wide receivers out there than there are running backs. Every team's got 4.
Yeah, and you made a good point too. The Ravens are in a position where they really can take the best player available. This is a very complete football team that's ready to win a championship now. So they have very few holes. You could argue that having a long-term, bigger-bodied receiver to spread the defense out was their number one need. And after that, I mean, they really have the luxury of being able to take the best player available, as they normally do. They've done a very good job of drafting historically here. So let's go over to the last wide receiver that went in round one, Kadarius Toney, going to the New York Giants. And we were talking about this pick a little bit before we started recording here. I mean, I would say probably the most criticized pick of round one. A lot of people, Giants fans, people in the fantasy community, absolute outrage over Kadarius Toney going to the Giants. I am in the bandwagon where I'm not going to necessarily criticize the pick to the extreme that others are. I don't think it was the most ideal pick for them, especially when you look at the weapons that they have already. They have invested some draft capital into some linemen. They took Andrew Thomas in the first round last year, so they're trying to improve that offensive line, but it's still, they struggled overall as a unit to protect Danny Dimes over there in New York as of right now. So I still think they could have used maybe another reinforcement there. But at the same time, I don't really see any linemen that had great value when they were on the clock. So I kind of understand where they're coming from. My opinion on this pick is I think Toney's going to be more of a better real life player than a fantasy asset, which is why I think people are upset by it. Because when you look at the target distribution, you have Barkley, who commands a good number of targets coming out of the backfield. They brought in Kenny Galladay. Darius Slayton has shown he's at least a starting caliber wide receiver in this league. You'll still have Sterling Shepard. They actually signed John Ross to a short-term deal. You still have Evan Ingram there. So this is, as you said earlier, a lot of mouths to feed, similar to Cincinnati. But New York has a ton of mouths to feed here. And I don't think that this offense, especially when you have Saquon Barkley, is one where they're going to be passing the ball 50 times a game. I think this is going to be a team that runs the ball to set up the pass rather than passing to set up the run. So I don't have high expectations for Toney from a fantasy perspective. He's a little bigger than him, but he's a little Percy Harvin-esque to me. I think he'll be a good return man. He'll have some volume being a gadget player, some value, I should say, being a gadget player, kind of keeping defenses on their toes, making sure, you're not going to be able to sleep on him and his speed and his ability. So I think from a fantasy standpoint, I don't really have any intentions of taking him. He'll probably be a guy that goes in the second round, completely off the redraft radar. But it's just funny to me to see all the criticism that this pick has gotten on fantasy Twitter, and I know you agree with that.
Well, I will put it to you another way. I mentioned this to someone the other day. Name me a New York Giant offensive weapon that wasn't hurt last year. Mm-hmm. And here we got they all missed game time, didn't they?
Yeah.
Every single one of them.
Yep.
So here's a guy who's healthy. So maybe this is a guy that they look at as, not having any issues, but I mean, on the field, and he's the kind of guy that can play, right? And he doesn't have to play right away. And that's the old thing again with wide receivers, right? You leave them wanting more, not wanting less. So if he doesn't take the field as much, the Giant fans will be, hey, we want him, as opposed to, hey, he's garbage. And you know what the fans in New York are like. You know what they're like.
Very, very patient.
Yeah, the most patient fans in the NFL, of course. But I don't know. I just look at this as not being so bad of a pick. Like maybe in the first round, yeah, okay, maybe that was a little bit of a stretch. That could probably got him a little bit later, especially after trading back. But in the scheme of things, I mean, if he goes out and catches 50, 60 balls and comes up with 500-600 yards, that kind of puts him as almost their wide receiver one, unless Galladay plays the entire season, because the rest of the guys on there they didn't have any 1,000-yard receivers, and they don't have any 50, 60 catch guys. So the one thing that I will say positive about Toney, he's got this phenomenal sideways move. And those are hard to find. Like when he's standing in one spot and the next thing you know, he's standing over here. I mean, never mind your speed forward, right? You can go sideways and get away from a block. The only danger there is you might be missing that block, and the block that's coming might be worse. So you got a guy who can who can play. He's a gadget guy. There seems to be more of those around. He's healthy, and you've got receiver issues because every single one of your receivers last year missed game time. Every single one of them. And so you take some chances. I don't blame him for doing it, but
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's important to note that the Giants actually had a lot of drop issues last year. So this is one of the interesting stats that I found last year. 10 of Daniel Jones' interceptions were off of receivers' hands, which is led the NFL by a pretty sizable margin. And I believe they finished second in the NFL in drops by the end of the season. They were definitely in the top three. They kind of went between 1 and 3 throughout the season. So this is a team, even though we look at these names and say, yeah, that's a pretty good wide receiving core. I mean, they did, I think, struggle more than a lot of people are speaking of. And Evan Ingram specifically really struggled with drops last season. I feel like he dropped more balls than he caught last year, but still got him a Pro Bowl bid. So I guess that's all that matters.
But if you're hurt, like from experience, if I'm hurt, I'm not lunging. I'm protecting. Yeah. I've got my shoulder in, and I'm protecting myself a little bit. If I got a rib injury, or if I've got my knee, I'm leading with my left leg instead of my right leg. So I'm doing things to protect myself sometimes. And if all these guys are hurt, no wonder they're dropping balls, because we call it footsteps, where there's a guy behind you, you're not quite sure where he is. So you're more concentrating on getting hit than you are catching the ball. So then that leads to a lot of tipped balls, and the ball's on target. And, it's not always the quarterback's fault when there's an interception. Sometimes the guy holds off his route a little bit, and you see it with the older quarterbacks. Like you see with Tom Brady, when someone intercepts his ball, he's angry, and he's angry at the receiver for what the receiver did. And Aaron Rodgers is even the worst one for that.
Oh, yeah.
If you don't turn and you intercept an Aaron Rodgers ball, you're not going to see a ball for weeks.
Yeah.
Just ask Easy Street Brown about that one, right? And that's the only reason I drafted that guy, by the way, years ago, because of his name, right? Equanimous Brown, right? His nickname was Easy Street Brown. So you got to have a guy like Easy Street on your team, right? So that's why
if you're going to build build a team based on their nickname, he's got to be a top 5 pick, I'd say.
Oh, he's right up with the Crazy Legs Hirsch.
Yeah.
You couldn't get a better guy. But I think, Daniel Jones is a good quarterback, and I would forget the interceptions, right? Peyton Manning led the league his rookie year, right? And Winston had how many a couple of years ago? But then he got his eyes. I was shocked. He went and had LASIK eye surgery after his season of 30 interceptions. Would someone not have figured that out beforehand?
Yeah, how many years was he in the league before someone was like, "Hey, you should probably get that fixed"?
And then he goes to New Orleans, and now he's going to be probably their number one quarterback, and he's got eyes.
That's all that it took.
That's all it took. 5,000 yards with no eyes. 5,000 yards to his team and 1,000 yards to the other team, but that's okay. So, go ahead. Sorry,
that's all right. We'll swing over to the running backs, and that closes out for the wide receivers. Let's start off with Najee Harris going to Pittsburgh. I know everybody probably was the most excited from a fantasy standpoint for this pick. A lot of volume and opportunity there for Najee Harris immediately. They still have Benny Snell there. They brought in Kalen Ballage. They drafted Anthony McFarland last year, but none of those names really jumping off the page. Najee Harris should slot in right away, especially you talked earlier about expecting that production from a running back on year one, especially when you're taking them in the first round. And I will say that I am probably one of the least optimistic about Najee Harris, just short term, that is. I think a lot of people are failing to realize how much this Pittsburgh Steelers offensive line struggled last year. They were the 31st best unit, or second worst, however way you want to look at it. Run blocking unit specifically in the league last year. They really didn't do much to address it this offseason. They're going into the season with a very young offensive line. So I like Najee Harris. I think he's going to be a top 15 running back this year based on volume alone. You have a lot of guys where we're scratching our head, and we'll talk about that with Travis Etienne and James Robinson a little bit, but you're kind of, saying, okay, where the share is going to go? Is it 50-50, 60-40? Najee Harris has a legitimate opportunity to take a hold of this backfield and never look back. He's I wouldn't say by far. Him and Travis Etienne are 1A and 1B, but Najee Harris is very talented, has very few flaws as a running back entering the league. So I expect him to step in. I think he'll have a lot of volume, but I'm a little nervous about that offensive line, if I'm being honest about it. So I think you're going to see some people based on that volume in redraft leagues. I bet you'll see him go in the end of the first round in some leagues, similar to what we saw with Clyde Edwards-Helaire last year. I'm never a fan of taking a rookie running back or a rookie of any position that early, because there is a point where you got to acclimate yourself to the league. But I think by the end of the year, we'll be talking about him as a top 15 guy.
Well, do you you know what I do with rookies, right?
You love drafting rookies.
You've got all my picks.
Yeah.
I'd rather have a veteran players on my team. And you even saw that new league that we're in together, right? Mm-hmm. I had pick 7, right? And someone offered me Hopkins for him. Okay, I'm fine with that. I don't think you're going to find a better player in the draft than Hopkins. You might find another Hopkins, but you're not going to find a better one. So why wouldn't I make that trade and know what I have instead of guess and what, who I might have, right? So, but Najee Harris, I like that pick in Pittsburgh. They can just pull out Franco's old jersey, put it on, right? And they just have to change the F to an N. And he can catch the miracle ball and score a touchdown to get to the Super Bowl. But the guy, I think he's going to be like Connors in his first year. I think he's going to get the most of the shares. I think he's going to be the 1A guy there, and he's going to probably be up in that 1,000 range. I think there's opportunity there. I don't think he's the best running back in the draft, but I think that it's the best spot for him. And for any running back that landed there, I would have thought, well, that's the opportunity. That's the golden opportunity. A team that started 12-0 last year, and they need a running back. Oh man, that would be, to me, would be a beautiful place. If I was a running back, that's where I'd want to go. A team that knows how to win. They got a quarterback who expects to win, a coach that's never missed the playoffs, and I have a chance with nobody else in that backfield of any note to be that guy. So I can take the ball by the horns and go with it, right? And I don't see any reason why someone wouldn't grab him. I mean, he's not going to be like the top 10, 15 running back in the NFL, but you get in that 15, 20 range. I think that's fair to say that he should be in that range there. And that translates to what, round 5 of a redraft, 4, 5, 6, something like that, depending on how fast the running backs go.
Yeah, yep, depending on the format. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. You bring up my rookie strategy a little bit. I think the thing in the trap that a lot of people fall into is that they rely on their rookies. So if you look at a lot of times how my teams are constructed is I don't rely on my rookies right away. Even if you look at my team last year, and I was starting more rookies than I normally do last season, but normally my strategy is to let them, actually not even, I think I was starting 2 of them in the beginning of the year. I had some guys sitting on the bench, Jonathan Taylor I had sitting on the bench early in the season, but I don't like relying on those guys. I like to have young guys stashed on my bench because I've always said I want to win my last 4 fantasy games, not the first 4. I mean, that's what you play for. That's been my strategy. So
3 out of 4 is not bad.
3 out of 4 is not bad. So that's been always my strategy is I like to stash rookies because you'll see a lot of times these guys catch on at the second half of the season. You saw Cam Akers do that last year. You saw Jonathan Taylor do that last season. J.K. Dobbins had a big second half. So a lot of these guys, the first half of the year, they really struggle, but you see them start to hit their stride the second half. So that's always been my strategy. I like taking chances on those young guys that could break through in the second half of the year. Maybe I have to use them as a bye week fill-in early in the season, but if you're relying on those guys, that's where I see the issue with I see people go even more rookie crazy than I do, and half of their starting lineup are rookies or really young players that are unproven. And I think you need a good mix of those players in your lineup and on your bench.
Well, I'm going on Twitter. Let's bash Twitter a bit. You got like a million fantasy analysts on there, right? And they're bragging about they've got pick 1. They're drafting first in every round. Okay. Yep. Well, and I sort of point out that I think I'd rather take my advice from a guy who's drafting 9th or 10th in every round.
Ouch! Burn.
I mean, seriously, and you're always one of the ones that I'm looking at, like what you're drafting, right? And I'm going, oh, okay, all right. Why do you take that guy? Oh, okay. So when we do that, we do our draft in February, which is really early, but it's great because now I know who you like. And when the dynasty drafts come around in like June and July, I know which guys to watch because I mean I'm the guy that looks for sleepers, right? The late. I mean, look at my list of picks. I've got all round 5 picks, and I mean that's the guys that I look for. And you're the one that's got these top 10, top 15 guys, and you pretty much nail them every time. So I follow you, right?
That's what you got to do, though. If you don't nail those early round picks, you look kind of silly. Especially, well, I forget you. So you traded me your first. You had the first overall rookie pick because it's
Yeah.
in reverse standing order. And I believe who did you end up taking with that pick that I traded you? Was it Myles Gaskin?
Well, it allowed me to take Hurts,
Hurts. Okay, so
right?
Hurts for, and then eventually you're going to end up trading Hurts to me. So I guess it all works out for me.
Yeah, but I also had the pick in the 12th round, right? So, and I think the other pick I got from you, I took Beasley with it, I think.
Easily.
Yeah. So Beasley and Hurts for Trevor Lawrence.
Yep. Essentially. Yep.
Yeah.
Which it is only a necessity. I wouldn't have taken Trevor Lawrence, or I wouldn't be taking Trevor Lawrence. But as of right now, I don't have a second quarterback in a 2 QB league, so my hands are kind of tied.
Yeah, well, I've got 4. You know where to go.
Yeah, we'll be talking at some point, I'm sure. I really thought Jalen Hurts was going to slip more. He didn't. He did not slip. But
I didn't really have a choice. I traded Josh Allen for some first round, second round pick. So I had to jump on quarterback early because that way, if I get my quarterback early, I don't have to worry about the rest of the draft. And I had all my picks in the first 12 rounds, 13 rounds of that draft because of the trades that I'd made. I didn't want to pick in rounds 13 to 22. I didn't want to have anything to do with those
rounds are the most fun rounds. Those are my favorite.
Well, then next year we can talk again. That's great.
Okay, I'll just take all of them for you. Perfect.
There you go. Yeah, we can have them all. So I think Dennis is still picking. So
he probably his team's only halfway done by right now. All right, let's go over to Travis Etienne then, who I alluded to when we were talking about Najee Harris. Now this is I feel bad for James Robinson, if we're being honest about it. He got an opportunity of a lifetime last year as an undrafted free agent, had a good run. He was a top 5 running back fantasy-wise most of the season. It's crazy when you look at some of his numbers. His opportunity share last year was 85%, which is absolutely unbelievable for a running back. You only see that from Christian McCaffrey typically, but they had a lot of injuries behind him, and they didn't really have anybody else behind him. So he really took the bull by its horn. He had a lot of success, but long term, this is not good for James Robinson. Travis Etienne, he was actually my favorite running back coming into the draft. I've been a big Travis Etienne and Justin Fields fan for the last 3 years. I like what they bring to the table, and they've always been 2 of my guys heading into this draft. So the landing spot, a lot of people aren't going to be optimistic year one about it. Naturally so, but I think the reality is, I've said before that talent leads to opportunity, and I think that's the case here. Travis Etienne is too talented to keep off of the field, and I think this is the case where maybe in the first half of the season, you're seeing James Robinson taking 65%, 70% of the workload. And that's when, if I'm a James Robinson owner, I'm unloading him as quickly as possible and selling high based on that first half production. Because in the second half of the season, I think this is going to be Travis Etienne's backfield, similar to what we've seen the guys I mentioned previously with Dobbins, Akers, Jonathan Taylor, similar rookies in the past. But I like the landing spot more than other people. This is going to be a whole new offensive philosophy. Darrell Bevel's coming in as the offensive coordinator. He's run some very successful offensive schemes with the Seahawks, and he was with Russell Wilson when he was a rookie. So I don't think there's going to be a lot of pressure on Trevor Lawrence. They're going to rely on that run game pretty extensively. So I think there'll be enough volume for Etienne and James Robinson in year one for them to be, in PPR leagues, we'll say back-end RB2s right around there with the workload that they're going to get. But I, in my opinion, think Etienne's too talented to keep off the field for long.
Well, I'm not trading Robinson. I have him on several teams. I drafted him in a lot of leagues in the 4th and 5th round last year.
Mm-hmm.
and not a lot of people actually drafted him. But our buddy Dennis, he's the one that pointed him out to me, and I went and watched the clips and looked him up, and I fell in love with this guy. And so I was glad to have him. I don't think 85% share is sustainable for him.
No.
And so I wasn't expecting 85% share. I was expecting 50, 60%, and that they would bring somebody in. So I'm not disappointed, or I'm not really caring much that there's another guy in that backfield. I mean, years ago I had Kamara and Ingram, and I was happy with that. I've had Eckler and Gordon. And it doesn't have to be in this league now, with all the players that played last year with the COVID and all that kind of stuff. There are so many teams now that have like 2 running backs.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not going to get like an Ezekiel's going to be the guy who gets all the targets in Dallas. But even Barkley, they keep looking for guys for Barkley. But you can't, if you lose Barkley, you've got nobody. If you have Robinson and something happens, you can play a guy without having to worry about aggravating an injury. So a guy can sit a little bit, and you can rest one or the other, and you can have a 1A and a 1B, and it doesn't have to be a bad thing for fantasy football. If you've got, are you expecting Kansas City not to sign another running back? I'm expecting something there. Right. Definitely. I don't think they go through the season without, with CEH. I mean, if they had the next pick right now, I bet you they'd take Williams. Mm-hmm. And I think that in the first 4 picks tonight, you're going to see him go. I think probably. Can you imagine Atlanta? If Atlanta got him and Pitts, and they've got Ridley and they've got Julio and even Gage, look at what they've got there. Just as long as they get some offensive line production, that team is going to be a force. And I don't know. I mean, I don't have a problem with ETN in Jacksonville. I kind of like the move. It shows me that probably Carlos Hyde, if you have him on your team, that he's probably someone you can drop. Armstead, I don't know. He never came back from his COVID last year, and he's still got that COVID designation on the apps. So I have found no information other than he had a really tough time with that. He was in the hospital 2 or 3 times. And I would be surprised if he came back. And I think that they looked at the running back room and they said, well, we got Robinson and we better get somebody. And I think and we better get a good one. And you're not going to pay the money for a veteran. So why not take this guy? I don't think it's a horrible pick, but they might have been better to take a wide receiver at that point, maybe even a tight end. I don't know.
Yeah, no, and I think that's interesting. I said that a few months ago that they were going to bring somebody into this backfield. So that's why I thought the overreaction was funny, because you saw what happened last year when everybody else went down in Jacksonville, and they're like, well, you're getting 85% James Robinson because that's our only option at this point. They didn't, imagine if James Robinson went down last season. They would have been in a really, for a long period of time. He missed a little bit of time, but they would have been. And you kind of saw they had no production from the running back position when that happened. So they didn't want to be in a situation where they didn't want to be in that situation again. So, I wasn't surprised that they took a running back. I was expecting them to maybe go with a Javonte Williams in round 2 or 3. So I'm maybe surprised that round 1 they went with Travis Etienne. But, you could argue he was the best player on the board. I love the Mark Ingram, Alvin Kamara comparison. That's been made several times. There's a lot of people, and I believe Mel Kiper did it last night. He compared Travis Etienne to Alvin Kamara. So I think that's a great dynamic to compare this to, and 2 guys that are going to be fantasy relevant. And we'll see how that split goes. I think it's going to be pretty close to 50-50 as we move throughout the season. I thought it was funny, the overreaction on Twitter. Urban Meyer came out last night after the pick and said Travis Etienne is going to be our pass catching back. And everybody's like, I'm not taking Travis Etienne. He should be outside the top 5 in rookie drafts. And if I'm pick 6 and he falls to pick 6, I will gladly take him. So I thought that overreaction was a little comical after that pick last night.
Well, this was 4 years ago, I guess it was, right? Where I was unbeaten, and I was like 8-0, and I was worried, and I ran out of running backs because of bye week. And I'm looking, the only 2 guys I've got are Kamara and Ingram, and I've been kind of alternating them. Mm-hmm. And I was calling them the twins, and one's in the other, right? So I said to my friend, to AJ, right, Adrian, I said, I'm going to play the twins, right? He says, the same guys from the same backfield? I said, yep. And they both went out and got, like, it was a standard league. It was a standard points league. They both went over 20 points. They were like 26 and 28 points or something like that. I was like, whoa. So I never took them off the rest of the thing. I had the 3 running backs from New England, and I had those 2 guys, and that's all I had for running backs. And I just played those guys all year long, and I won. And then that was, I learned then, like, don't worry about it, right? Because sometimes the guy's going to get 20, but the guy who gets 12, that's okay in standard. 12 is a fine line. It's fine to have 12. Every single guy in your team gets 12 points in standard league scoring. You should win that week.
Yep.
If your quarterback gets 20, right? It's like based on quarterback 20, and every one of your guys gets 10, 12 points, you should win your standard league scoring. Mm-hmm. Right. PPR, no, but in standard league, yes.
In the back of my mind, I'm thinking right now, most people probably don't even know what standard leagues are anymore. Every single league is PPR now. That's the first thing. I prefer standard leagues, actually. So I always ask when I was taking sit questions last year, is it a standard or PPR league? And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, people really don't know what standard leagues are anymore. I didn't know we were at that point now.
It's a standard PPR league.
Yeah, right. I mean, I guess since everybody uses PPR now, that's the new standard, I guess.
More points is better, right? Everybody just wants more points, and
that's all. Yep.
It should be. If you go back to standard and try it, it's hard. It's a lot harder than PPR, right? To get the points out of your guys.
I think I'm in 33 leagues now, and I think only one of them is standard now. And last year, a league I've been in for a long time, I'm the commissioner. I've tried to put off this vote for years to make it PPR, but finally I lost. They're like, come on, we got to vote on this. And I was the only one that voted against it. So
why would you change it? There's no reason to change it. That league is what it is, right? And it makes it fun and different. If everything's the same, then it's boring if it's all the same, right? Take different players on different teams. Like, to see what all the players are like instead of just your guys on every team, right?
Yep.
Like, flip them around, I've never had Miles Sanders on a team, and I'd like to have him on a team. And I don't want a Philadelphia player on my team, of course, but
we just got you saying that on camera for the record. You would like an Eagles play.
Well, there's a reason why we call ourselves Dirty Landry, right? So.
Definitely a reason forever. Let's end off then on the quarterbacks. I don't want to get too far into the quarterbacks here, all 5 that were taken in the first round. I'm not big into taking rookie quarterbacks in redraft leagues. Obviously, the game changes in dynasty leagues, specifically Superflex leagues especially. But kind of the question that I want to throw out there and talk a little bit about, I think most people are assuming, and maybe it's a poor assumption, but a lot of people are assuming Trevor Lawrence is going to have the most success in year 1. But I just want to talk about who is set up the most for short-term success, not necessarily in dynasty leagues, but who has the best chance to make an impact in year 1. So for me, when you're breaking it down, I mean, Trevor Lawrence is probably, him and Zach Wilson, I'll say, are probably the only 2 that are going to be day 1 starters. And I know that Urban Meyer's come out and said that he's open to putting Trevor Lawrence on the bench, but I legitimately think that all 5 fans in Jacksonville would have a riot if that were to happen. So I can't see that happening. Trevor Lawrence is going to start day 1, and he's ready to start day 1. I mean, there's really no reason to sit the guy on the bench. Zach Wilson, maybe a little more raw, but you're kind of in a situation. Once again, they traded away all their other options, so Zach Wilson's going to be the guy there. But Trey Lance, Mac Jones, I expect to start on the bench. Justin Fields, I think, is the interesting one to me. I mean, they brought in Andy Dalton. It looks like Andy Dalton will most likely be the day 1 starter. Andy Dalton has come out saying, hey, I'm the day 1 starter, I expect, and I was told I was going to be the quarterback here. Is that necessarily going to matter? Did they know they were going to be in the position to take Justin Fields at that point? Probably not. They were aggressive in trading up and getting Justin Fields. But I think that the Bears are in a situation where that fan base it has been a little upset, to put it lightly, with the quarterback play. So I don't think that they can afford to have Andy Dalton in there very long. And I think Justin Fields, in my opinion, is also ready to play sooner than other people are giving him credit for. He struggled. He had 2 games in college where he really struggled, but I love Mel Kiper brought it up last night. I brought this up before too. His team still won in those 2 games, just for the record. So he as an individual struggled a little bit, but he still did what he needed to do to make sure that his team won. So I'm a big Justin Fields fan. I think that Justin Fields, I'm really interested to see how Matt Nagy uses him, if we're being honest from it. Matt Nagy, I think, has a creative offensive mind, but I don't think he's had the quarterback where he necessarily could implement a system that he's been looking for. When you have Mitch Trubisky, you're a little limited in how you're scheming and how you're creating your game plan. So I like Justin Fields quite a bit. If I was going to pick a quarterback, and I still think Trevor Lawrence has the most success year one, because I think Urban Meyer and that entire offensive staff is going to be really smart with how they use them. I don't think they're going to put too much on him, and I think that's going to lead to some early success for him. But I think if I was to pick someone outside of Trevor Lawrence, I like the situation for Justin Fields. I mean, Mac Jones is in a perfect situation in New England, but I think from a fantasy perspective, I like Justin Fields. He's got some weapons there with Allen Robinson returning. David Montgomery really came on in the second half of last year. Even Darnell Mooney was pretty consistent. We saw some games from him. I think he has some potential out there. Anthony Miller, not the greatest target. Cole Kmet, I think, as a young tight end, has some potential as well coming into years 2 and 3 here. So I really like Justin Fields in Chicago. And but I think all these guys landed in pretty good situations, if we're being honest about it. I can't point to one of these guys and say, it would have been a lot better if they landed in this spot or that spot. I think it landed out pretty perfectly for these guys.
I'm pretty excited about Mac Jones in New England. I'm not even a New England fan, really. I just like to see success. I mean, over the years, there's not very many times where you see success like that. And that's a true dynasty. You had the Montreal Canadiens in hockey. You had the New York Yankees in baseball. The New England Patriots, 20 years of dominance in that, in one bad year. And I think that if he walks into a situation and he's behind an experienced guy like Cam Newton, he's got one of the best coaches ever in football history. And I think that if there's ever an opportunity to become that guy, that's the perfect situation for him. But as far as this year is concerned, I get a feeling that, and it's just a feeling, that in San Francisco, that high ankle sprain that Jimmy had last year is a lot more damaging than everyone thinks. I saw Mostert being interviewed, and he was talking about that injury still bothering Garoppolo, and they may still have to have surgery. And I think that's why the need for the quarterback, because they look at their team as being good enough to be in a Super Bowl and win a Super Bowl, and they're not going to do it if they don't have a quarterback. And they think Mullins is probably fine, like as a backup kind of deal, but to lead a team from start to finish, I don't think so. So having Lance there, I think gives him the opportunity to be the most successful of those quarterbacks this year, simply because that team does not rely on passing. They've got good running backs. They can move the ball. They're experienced older guys, as far as league is concerned, and that's a good situation for a young quarterback to go into, because you do have backups and you do have Jimmy there just in case. But I get a feeling that something's wrong with a little bit more than they're talking about with Garoppolo. So as far as Chicago is concerned, if Fields can actually throw the ball as fast as Mooney and Robinson can run and hit them when they're open, I think he will do just fine. I think Dalton is going to probably be the guy that starts for the first 3, 4, 5 games. And if they're not like 4-1 or 3-2, but if they're not like 4-1 and doing well, that's when you're going to see the new guy come in and take over. He's got to come into a situation where he's not forced to be the guy at that moment. So ideal situation, they're 0-2 and he goes in, because they're already 0-2. So it doesn't really matter, right? So he can go in with a little less pressure and a little more comfort in knowing that if he loses that game, that's okay, but he'll learn, and then he win type of thing. So sometimes you want to slide a rookie into a situation where it's okay, and then other guys, you want to put them in a situation where they've got so many good guys around them that they have to be successful. So those two guys to me are going to be the most successful. I mean, Trevor Lawrence, I think he's a good quarterback. I think he'll be fine, but I'm still a little bit leery of the college the college coach coming to the NFL. And I just haven't seen that many be super successful. Like, there's a few, like, Jimmy Johnson, Pete Carroll, those guys, but there's just a lot of guys that you don't remember too. So
yeah.
I don't know. I just get a feeling that Jacksonville just isn't. I mean, the owner there, I think he just bought the team so he could wear a team jacket, in the owner's box, right? And I like the Jets. Every 2.6 years, they get a new quarterback. Jacksonville's probably the last 25 years they've had 10 quarterbacks, so it's the same. So until you prove to me wrong, I'm just trying to stay away from quarterbacks from situations like that. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I said this in one of our group chats last night. I hope Trevor Lawrence and the Jags have success. I just like when teams like the Browns, Jags emerge from just such mediocrity for years and years. So I do wish that I hope for the Jags' sake, I hope Trevor Lawrence is everything that he's hyped up to be. I thought this was interesting because I thought the same thing about the Jags. I guess I never realized Blake Bortles started 5 seasons for the Jaguars. That's unbelievable to me that he got that much of an opportunity, or 4 seasons, I believe it was 4 full seasons with the Jaguars, which is unbelievable that they went with Blake Bortles 4 straight years.
Well, there's history there, right? I mean, I look at things maybe a little different than some people, but for 50 years, the Jets haven't had a quarterback.
Yeah.
Really, right? Jacksonville, kind of the same thing for the last 25 years. You take away those 2 seasons where they did well, and all that Trevor Lawrence has to do to be above average for a quarterback there is win 6 games.
Yeah.
That's it, because they average 4-something wins per season, maybe 5 now. I don't know. But if he only has to win 6 games, and he's better than most. Mm-hmm. So, how good do you have to be to win 6 games?
That'll be a new feeling for him. He hasn't lost a game in 7 years. He didn't lose at the college or at the high school level. I saw that last night. I was like, well, welcome to Jacksonville. That's your welcome to the NFL. He's going to lose a few this year.
That's like Jimmy, right? He plays for Boston. They don't lose any games. He plays 2 games for them. They're 2-0. He gets traded to San Francisco, walks in, wins 5 in a row for the worst team in the league. It's like, all we do here is win? Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's just normal because that's all it is. It's easy. It's easy to do in this league.
So teach a guy how to throw. I can teach my kid how to throw. I can teach my kid how to ride a bike, but I can't teach my kid how to win. He just has to hang around people who win.
Easier said than done.
Pretty much, yeah. So I hope he's a winner.
But I think that's all that I have here then. We went through a little longer than I wanted, but we went through all of the offensive players from round 1 last night. CJ, I appreciate you coming on here. Why don't you go ahead, tell people what you have going on right now. I'll put your podcast link down below when I post this as well, but tell people what you're working on right now.
Well, right now we're working on interviews with people like yourself who are in the business and see what kind of experience they have, what they like to promote and so forth. Last week, we did a show on IDP last week. We've got one coming up on women in fantasy football sports. There seems to be a lot more now than there ever was before. And they all have, not all, but they all have good opinions in my world, and all opinions are good. Because they are just that, their opinions. Mm-hmm. But we spend most of our time looking for the sleeper picks. I set up most of my fantasy teams so that I'm drafting rounds 4 and 5 a lot. And I do that on purpose because I need to find guys. And last year in this one league, I was really proud of the fact that I came up with Robinson, Gaskin, Davis, and I forget who the other guy was. But I needed a running back, and I wound up with 4 guys in those 4th, 5th rounds that played all season for me. So we spent a lot of time beating the bushes and looking at film of the later round guys, and the guys that, it's easy to come up, not easy, but it's easy to find someone who knows what they're talking about as far as the first 10 or 20 picks in your draft go. Mm-hmm. But there's not that many people out there that specifically spend most of their time on round 5, mm-hmm. right? And then I do a lot of features on the older guys like Joe Namath I've mentioned and Warren Moon and guys like that. So the history of the game. Believe it or not, there was football before you were born. Really? I didn't realize that. You learn something new every day. My favorite NFL moment ever is Bo Jackson running out of the stadium in Seattle. That is the most amazing. If you've never seen that, you go back and look at that. right? He got the ball in the 9-yard line and went 91 yards for a touchdown and outran everybody on the field and was pulling away from the defensive backs when he got to the end zone. There was like 15 yards, between them. And he went right out the tunnel, and it was a Monday night game, and they were talking about, hey, he's in Tacoma now, But Bo Jackson was an amazing guy. But we're looking for the guys that you're not looking for. Everyone's looking for that number 1 guy, number 5 guy, right? Well, we're looking for number 40 and 50. And those are the guys. If you want to find out who those are, then pay attention to what we have to say.
And where can people find you? On Twitter, on what else you guys have?
Well, we're Twitter, Facebook. I think we're on Instagram. I don't know how that works, but Kevin does that for us. And we have NFLFantasyReport.com. And from there, you can link to our podcasts. We're on Spotify, Deezer, Buzzsprout, and so forth. And I think we're pretty easy to find. And we have a link on our website for you can contact. So if you have a question, just send it, and we do reply, and we try to reply within a few hours of your message. So, we've helped a few people over the years, and we have some good clients who have told us that we should get on Twitter, and I'm almost regretting that. But
yeah, I was going to say. I was going to let you say it. I wasn't going to make any assumptions, but.
Well, you get a little traction there, but not nearly as much traction as I thought. And sometimes when I read what's going on there, I just shake my head and go, oh my gosh, you guys, I've been doing this for a long time. My first sportscasting job was 1979. The first football game I went to was 1965. And, I've seen Joe Cap, look that one up. He tied the NFL record for most touchdown passes in a game is 7. And who holds that record? Joe Cap. Back in the day, and he did it with a broken hand. And back in the days when quarterbacks played with a broken hand, right, and got hit, and they were like running backs. So we do all kinds of stuff, but most of it's just like sports, like listen to a sportscast, basically, because that's basically what we do and what we're good at.
Cool. So make sure you check out the NFL Fantasy Report. CJ, I appreciate you coming by. Hopefully I can get we're in 2 leagues together this year. Hopefully I can get your number in a championship in at least one. One's an infant team, so I think I got a little bit of work to do, but got Christian McCaffrey now, so one step closer.
And you should have his handcuff.
We'll work on that. Don't you worry. I feel like I've said before, we need a trade mediation podcast where you have one guy in the middle and you have 2 people negotiating a trade live. So I think we'll have
a good offer, man. It's the best offer you're ever going to get for a handcuff.
I think the scariest thing is I don't want to give you any more ammunition in the 5th round there to find your guys. I think that's the problem that I have there.
I'd have 7 5th-round picks in that league if you did that.
Yeah. But I appreciate you having, I appreciate you coming on. Definitely I'll be having more episodes daily. Make sure you guys follow me on YouTube, Dr. Fantasy Sports on Twitter. I'm on Spotify and wherever else you listen to podcasts. So CJ, nice to have you on, and I'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, man. It's always nice to listen to you. You're one of the best.
Appreciate it.